Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the digital campus of Newark United Pentecostal Church. It is Friday evening, and I hope that you are glad that it is Friday evening. I must admit that I am exceedingly happy that it is Friday evening, and I am so glad to be sitting here with you. If this is your first time with us, we welcome you, and as you can tell by what's scrolling below, all during our intro, you can find out more about us at newarkupc.info. Everything about us, and particularly what we are doing and how we are walking together during this season of COVID-19. And while our campus is shut down, both due to COVID-19 and because of renovations, all of that can be found at newarkupc.info. I would encourage you and draw your attention to that all of our upcoming events are there. You can see what's coming, and particularly our small groups and also our daily broadcasts. We do broadcast Tuesday through Sunday, so 6 days a week, same time, 7 o'clock on two different channels, our YouTube channel and our Facebook channel. So whichever one you prefer, you can join in with us. Wednesdays and Fridays, we do it where you can actually ask questions and chat with us. And so tonight is going to be an exciting time of being able to do that. And so I'm glad that you're here. And to all of you who are not guests and not visitors, but rather you've been a part of us and continue to be faithful, thank you. Thank you for being faithful to tonight's broadcast, but also thank you for being faithful in your giving. Thank you for being faithful in small groups. Thank you for being faithful in all the things that nobody sees. And we are entering the beginning of the end, and it's exciting because I believe within this year we're going to be able to come back together and see one another face to face, even if it does include a mask. Anyway, my guest tonight has, for a relatively young age, he is younger than me, and he is a good friend of mine. Some of you may recognize him. He has been to Newark before. He has preached at Newark before. We have known each other for a number of years, but for that relatively young age, he has had quite a few things in his life, quite a few twists and turns, if you will, from the sciences to the humanities, from North America to Uganda and Jerusalem, from the pulpit and the pastorate to the lectern and the classroom. He has been all of these places. In fact, I've informally titled tonight A Journey of Faith. And I would say of my friend, as you're going to hear tonight, he has either been on a journey of faith or he's just plain lost. You get to decide tonight which you think it is. And as we have joked with one another, perhaps a little bit of being lost is a part of a journey of faith. Before I bring him on, he made a comment as I was prepping this, and I've just posted it actually to the chat there. He said he's got a prayer. It's actually by Thomas Merton that says, "My Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore will I trust you always, though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone." And my friend Roy Fisher says that that is his current prayer. And so I welcome to the broadcast my friend Roy. Welcome, Roy. Glad to have you with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for the intro. Yeah, the prayer kind of sums up the whole story in short form.
Exactly. So let's jump into this story. And I'm excited. I love it when I interview guests that have stories that I know enough about to ask questions, but there's a lot I don't know. And so what I'd like you to do is start with, Roy, I know that you were born into a apostolic Pentecostal family. And so you were, like myself, were born in the church. My understanding is your parents were not pastors. They were not preachers. And so that's a little different than my story. My dad, of course, which you are good friends with, was a pastor and a preacher, at least starting at the age of about 4.5 for me, which is, I don't think I remember anything before that, honestly. But we both grew up within church, grew up in the pew, probably slept under the pew or on the pew, etc. And but then from there, where did life take you? Where did you grow up? And kind of take us through, say, undergrad.
Sure. So yeah, you're correct. My parents are not pastors. I will note that my great-grandmother was something of an itinerant preacher, apostolic, sort of an interesting story. And so I do have a few little flyers from various revivals that she held back in 50s or something like that. So way back. So interesting roots, of course, that float back in time. But no, I did my undergrad in Northern California. One reason I actually stayed close by, I had an opportunity to go a few places, but I wanted to stay close to home, stay involved locally, both with the church, with family. And so I actually did my undergrad in physics. Minor in chemistry, and then towards the end of the program.
So the only thing you needed was to study math, and you'd have had the story of my father then, huh?
Yeah, well, I mean, we had plenty of math, trust me. So I can. This is one of the things. Your father and I are probably two of maybe, I don't know, half a dozen apostolic preachers that can do calculus.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I think I know two others besides your father. That's it. But I'm sure there are more out there somewhere. But yeah, we can do real math.
Definitely not one of them that can do calculus. My father, in his great wisdom, allowed me to bow out of calculus. I did trigonometry, and I said, Dad, I don't need to do calculus. And he also, Roy, my apologies, but he did not force me to take physics either.
Yeah, don't apologize to me. You should be upset with him, because it's
I'm very grateful that he did not force me to take physics. That was not my strength. Vincent picked that up just fine and did just fine with physics, but not me. All right, so you studied physics and you studied chemistry.
Yes, I did a minor in chemistry because my work was kind of at the interface. So my senior thesis was using supercritical fluid to extract essential oils from rosemary, and then comparing them with typical steam distillation techniques and see if anything changes. So kind of interface of physics and a bit of chemistry there. So but near the end, I started getting more and more engaged with a technical analysis, if you will, of scripture, which probably won't come as a surprise to you, but often that's not a highly advocated, shall we say, pathway within especially the Pentecostal tradition. So your father's very much an outlier.
Don't say that too loud, because most of our audience doesn't know that almost every pastor goes and studies the Bible technically. So don't tell them. Don't let them in on that. They think I'm normal. So don't. Well, they probably don't think I'm normal, but it's not. But
yeah, I was going to say, I don't think anybody thinks you're normal. But,
right, but the abnormal doesn't have to do with the Bible study. It has to do with other features.
Correct. So at this point in time within our tradition, there weren't very many people kind of engaging scripture on the level. And when I say a technical level, I mean first century context, original languages, these sorts of things. And so I actually ended up getting a religious studies minor.
So you actually did this in undergrad, even though you were studying physics and chemistry.
Yeah.
You began in like your senior year to kind of be pulled toward, or junior year.
Yeah. So late junior year. Earlier on, we had advisors, right? So I was fortunate enough to be in the university honors program, and my advisor told me that learning Hebrew really had nothing to do with my program, and I shouldn't take those classes. So I just never went back to the advising office again and took Hebrew anyway. So that was kind of the pathway there. But what happened is, as I got towards the end of the program, I realized, so the initial goal was go to medical school, because that's kind of, if you grow up in a very poor area, which I did, kind of the idea is if you're smart, you should either be a doctor or a lawyer, because then you can make good money. So I didn't have at the time a rather high opinion of lawyers. So I figured, well, doctor sounds like a more morally palatable pathway. So, but as I started getting towards the end of the program, I realized that really wasn't the direction I was supposed to go, which left me in a bit of a quandary. This question is, now what? And I think this is where the Merton quote, at least for me, really starts coming to the fore, is as I started, kind of this process of discernment, like, what am I going to do? One of my instructors at Chico State, that's where I did my undergrad, said, well, you could always just go actually study scripture. I'm like, well, yeah, but good luck. How am I going to get into a grad program, of any value with a degree in physics that really doesn't prep you? I've taken a couple Hebrew classes, religious studies minor, but that's not really the normal resume when you're applying to grad school. So he said, turns out he was a bit more of a famous scholar than I realized. And so he kind of put together some things, wrote me some really nice letters, and I got into a master's program in biblical language at the GTU in Berkeley, which is kind of the West Coast hub for theological studies. It's an ecumenical center. One reason I liked it. I didn't have to go. I didn't want an MDiv. I didn't want a master's of theology. I just wanted tools to explore the text. And so they had this program where you could take classes, Jesuit schools, they had non-denominational school, Episcopalian school, a Baptist school, and I could take classes at UC Berkeley. And so I thought, well, this is perfect. It's only a couple hours from home. I can kind of commute. I don't have to, rent someplace down there. Because the downside is there's not a lot of money for these, types of programs. Right. So, right.
A side note for folks that are listening, I actually spent time in Roy's stomping grounds there, not at Berkeley. I did not ever I saw the entrance gates to the campus, but I did spend time in the halls of GTU, the various schools there, because I did both my German reading proficiency and my French reading proficiency in the summers out there during that time. So I am aware of GTU, but I need to pause us here, Roy, because I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. When did you go off to Uganda?
Oh, so this was in between the undergrad and then the program at Berkeley. So the pastor in a neighboring town who I had known since I was a small child, it was my pastor's wife's brother. You can kind of follow these tracings. Arlen Royer had established him and his wife, Darlene Cantola, then Royer. She was a missionary in her own right to Kenya, an amazing teacher. She writes curriculum for GATS, and so I just want to give her a plug. Fantastic woman. So they met over there and then got married and ended up pioneering the work in Uganda, the apostolic work there. So since I had known them, lifelong friend and I decided that we would kind of take a break in between, and went over for about 3 months and worked in the school that they had established. So raised a bit of money, stayed with them. I think a part of it, we thought we were going to get a little bit of a vacation out of it. Turns out there was morning prayer every day at 6 a.m. So, here you get these two guys that just graduated high school, right? Just want to coast for a little bit.
So this was between high school and college.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. College. I apologize. Okay. Just graduated from college.
Okay.
Kind of like, that's why I'm kind of like, oh yeah, let's just coast, take a little bit of a break. Yeah. So, 6 a.m. Prayer every morning before breakfast. So, lovely time. Lovely time. Arlen Royer, a bit of a cantankerous character. which seems to be kind of the characters I tend to associate with. So very outspoken. And while we were there,
wait a minute. Wait a minute. What are you talking about here? Are you
well,
are you calling my father cantankerous?
No, he's the outspoken one. You're the cantankerous one. So here's an example. While we're there, Arlen Royer decides, McCreary University is in Kampala. I've got two college guys here. Yeah, we should do something on the college. So when he submits kind of this proposal to the powers that be, they inform him that this kind of stuff doesn't work in Africa. So he promptly ignores them. And I put together cribbing from some American programs, kind of a constitution. We apply, get an established campus ministry program in really the best university in Uganda, and it was kind of the crown jewel of East Africa. West Africa as a whole, East, West. In between high school and college, I spent 3 weeks in East Africa in Cote d'Ivoire. So I think I forgot to mention that. So in any case, McCreary, before Idi Amin, for those who know their history, completely turned everything upside down, was really the crown jewel in terms of higher education for that part of Africa. So we got a great campus ministry going, and they actually ended up creating a couple satellite things. And then a few years later, when the rest of the group caught up, the larger institutional group, they said, "Oh, here we have a program for you to establish campus ministries." And Arlen Royer was like, "Yeah, we've kind of had one going for a few years now. Thanks." So we did a few things like that while we were there, working in the school, helping establish some of these programs. And yeah, so then I came back and did the master's degree in biblical language.
Just on a side note, when in this scenario, when did we meet? You submitted a paper at UGST. I think I was a respondent at Urshan Graduate School of Theology, and that's where we first met. I was already teaching there and in my PhD program. Where in this timeline?
So that happened once I was back and working on my master's degree.
So you were at GTU already when we first met?
Yeah. And just FYI for people, the presentation was rather technical, and it was just Stephen and I. Literally, nobody else came to the presentation. So he was kind enough to sit there, and so I presented my paper to him, and he responded. And yeah, that was how we got started together. Two people talking in a room about what I thought was very interesting, important stuff. But nobody else came to the session, which I think it's important to note some of those things, right? It's not
absolutely.
It's not everybody's always showing up for things. Sometimes it literally is you and one other person. But if it's meaningful, if that's what you're supposed to be doing, then you just carry on. So,
and I'm not for sure that I showed up because I was interested in the topic, but I was required to. It was my responsibility to respond to his paper, so I was there. But you never know when you're going to run into somebody and become friends, and so that's the auspicious beginnings of Roy Fucher and Stephen Beardsley.
Yeah, well, you may have been one of the few other folks
since then that have been much more populated and much more lively. I do believe, correct?
Yes, for sure.
I had one I can remember that I was moderating. Roy was presenting. And an esteemed colleague was on the other side and was quite agitated with what Roy was presenting. Let's just say I've had many people comment that they were in the room at that event, much more populated and much more colorful. But we divert. Let's get back to. So you attend GTU. That was 2 years that you studied there at GTU?
So the plan was 2 years, but there were too many good classes, and I felt like I needed to deepen the intellectual bench, so to speak. So I took an optional third year and backfilled with a lot of other historical material, philosophy. So everything from, Thomas Aquinas to spiritual anthropology. I took a liturgical studies class, just because I realized there was so much about the wider expression of Christianity in the world that I had no clue about. So yeah, that was kind of, you had an option to do kind of a 3-year, more along the lines of like an MDiv, but it still was the master, Master of Arts in Biblical Language. So
Now,
I didn't take a lot of theology proper classes, but there was just a lot of fascinating stuff that I got to include. So
now, while you're at GTU, what happened? Because you're still living at home and commuting.
yeah,
So your home is where?
So a little town north of Sacramento, Oroville, but I live in the foothills above it.
Okay. So you're commuting a couple of hours down into basically the San Francisco area, Berkeley,
yep.
GTU. And during that time, what happens is this about the time that something happens at the home church?
No, so that's after. So towards the end of this period, again, kind of coming to the end of this, master's degree program, and then the question is, okay, what's next? So if you haven't noticed, I'm not too good with the 10-year plans. So I'm thinking, what's going on? Well, when I had been in Uganda, the end of our trip in Uganda, we took a trip on our way home, my friend and I, through Jerusalem. And we met Robert McFarland there, who was trying to establish a Bible training center there and in Amman, Jordan. So he had a bunch of material.
Let me insert here that Robert McFarland is the brother of one of our guests, who I've also noticed through the chat is watching now, which is Lois McFarland Truman. So for those of you that have listened to her wild and wacky journey of faith, another fellow traveler probably prays the Thomas Merton prayer, and in most days is unclear whether she is following God or is simply lost. It could be a mixture of the two. Anyway, that Robert McFarland is Lois Truman's brother. So kind of fill in there are family similarities, I will say, between these McFarlands. They are a unique bunch, and we love them dearly. And Roy fits very well with them. So anyway, carry on. So you go through Jerusalem.
Lois has much better hats. Lois has much better hats than Bob. He just wears ball caps. She has amazing hats.
She was on our broadcast and did not wear a hat. I was shocked. It's like the first time I've ever seen Lois without a hat. I don't know what the deal is, but anyway.
I don't think I've seen her without a hat yet. So, I know. In any case, I love her dearly. So we made a connection, and then started trying to put together some pieces because we had done the campus ministry stuff. I already had kind of some of these bylaws, so started working on kind of frameworks for training, ministers and things in Israel and then Jordan. So when I'm getting close to the end of my master's program, I'm still in occasional contact with Bob McFarland. So he said, well, we're leaving the field. We have to raise some money. Maybe you could come spend a year here. Which I thought, well, okay, well, that's very intriguing. Of course, the question is, how am I going to pay for this? At this point in time, you have to be very careful about, legal status in the country, what's going on. So I was in the bookstore in Berkeley, and a visiting professor with whom I had taken a class at UC Berkeley was in the bookstore. He's a professor at the Hebrew U, Jerusalem. So I saw him and I said, hey, how's it going? We started chatting. I said, yeah, I was thinking about maybe coming back to Israel for a while. And he says, why don't you just sign up as a research graduate student and you can take some classes. If you like it, maybe you'll want to stay. So I said, oh, that sounds great. So I got a bit of information from him. We left. I went home. Looked it all up. Turns out, though, you need an official sponsor from the university. So it's not like the U.S. system where you just kind of apply and then they look at you. You can't apply to someone who's already agreed. So I thought, well, this was a good effort. So much for that. So I sent him a thank you email anyway and said, I appreciate the lead. Seems to be it's not going to work out because of XYZ. Get an email back the next day that says, oh, put me down and list another professor that I'd never met as your sponsors. So turns out I ended up being accepted as a research student, grad student at the Hebrew U for the grand total of something like $1,000 for a year. Those were the only fees that weren't covered. I still to this day don't know who covered the other ones. I don't know if it was Yair did something or who knows. So that really facilitated me returning to continue working with the training center there in Jerusalem. That's now, I think it's become something else, the Jerusalem Bible Prophecy College or something like that. But we were a much smaller connection, and then I would bounce over to Amman a couple times with the Reeds, and then Cindy White, who was a dear friend, unfortunately passed away a couple years ago, rather unexpectedly. So her and I would tool around Amman in her car, and then she was wild enough to loan it to me to drive down to Petra in the south and take a little bit of a road trip. So spent a year there working on these projects, taking classes, again bulking up my Hebrew Bible, so doing some classical biblical Hebrew stuff like the documentary hypothesis, kind of getting really down in the weeds, really enjoying myself. And then of course, like 6 months into it, it's like, oh wow, this is a 1-year deal. Do I really want to stay in Israel and do a PhD here? Do I want to go back to the States? If I go back to the States, like, where am I going to go? Like, you have to start applying. So I just felt like, this has been great, but I do need to return to the States. So that's when I applied for a PhD program in Near Eastern religion, hosted at UC Berkeley, but in cooperation with the GTU. So there were some faculty that I knew, kind of an interdisciplinary program, Near Eastern studies, anthropology. And so I got accepted into that, came back, started that program. And then about a year or so into that program, my home church pastor resigned. Things kind of went into a bit of chaos, and the presbyter asked me to, if I could kind of serve as an intern during a transition phase. And so I was very resistant to the idea. And so about 6 months into the transition intern period, it started looking increasingly less likely that some pastor was going to come. Very small church, kind of in the middle of nowhere, very poor area. It's not kind of an ideal destination. And so had a couple people suggest, well, maybe you should stay here, including a person on this call who called me and said, you're not going to want to hear this. And I'm not saying you're supposed to stay there. But what I am saying is, I think it's probably the will of God for you at least to ask his opinion about this and be open. And so
you're referring to my father, is that correct?
Your father and you. We had a conversation about this that you may not remember.
No, I do remember.
My conversation with you, as I recall, it went something like, yeah, you're wrong, but we're friends, and out of deference to the respect for our mutual friendship and the fact that I think as wild as you are, you do have a relationship with God. Out of respect for that, I'll consider it. But I know you're wrong in advance, just FYI.
I'm really glad that out of deference for me, you conceded to talk to God. That's a good move, Roy.
I talked to him. I just wasn't sure I wanted to talk to him about this particular topic. So the 6 months turned into a kind of a 10-year project. Yeah. So so I'm doing a PhD and all this stuff concurrently, which of course then slows down the PhD process.
I know a little bit about that too. I had my PhD program slowed down a little bit by pastorate. All right, guys, we got to insert here. So you're pastoring in Orville, 2 hours or so, 2.5 hours to the north of Berkeley.
Yeah.
But then you're in class in Berkeley.
Right.
Where'd you stay when you came to Berkeley?
On a sailboat. I bought a boat because it was cheap. So I hope my mother never watches this video, because part of my master's program, I actually slept in my car. She didn't know that. She thought I had a room down in Berkeley, but I would just find one of these nice upscale neighborhoods, park my car, and tilt the seat back, and then get up early in the morning, because sometimes I would have a back-to-back 2 days class or something, and then I would just go early to campus. So go to the one of the bathrooms, brush my teeth, comb my hair. I had more luck combing it then than I evidently do today. But in any case,
so you played a bit of homeless as well then, huh?
Yeah. And so I bought a small sailboat. Not like I had friends who were like, "Oh, how's life on the yacht?" Like, no, this is like literally just a cabin that basically you have the kind of a bed, a little washroom, a sink, and a microwave. That's it. So I would stay on the boat when I was in Berkeley. But I did the math. It was basically I could buy the boat outright for right about 4 or 5 months worth of rent in the Bay Area. So I don't know what life is like for you guys out there. California is insane. So like a studio, no problem at all. $1,500, $1,600, $1,700 a month. So for a studio,
well,
like 400 square feet.
I remember when I was at the GTU, I went walking. I actually stayed in a monastery the first time. The second time I couldn't take staying in the monastery. That was more Roy speed. That drove me nuts. I stayed in a hotel the second time. But anyway, I stayed in a monastery, and part of the walk down to GTU, I came by, and there was an A-frame that I looked up. It was a one-room A-frame. Now, it had a view to kill for, but an A-frame, single-room house in the hills above GTU, above Berkeley, and it was $1.2 million.
Yeah. And that's more than a decade ago. So you can imagine.
Oh, absolutely.
And where things have gone. So, yeah. So it created, though, a really fascinating intersection between kind of the lived life of the faith community and the academy. So, interestingly enough, people in both domains were usually, found what I was doing to be weird. So it was kind of it was kind of fun, when you're in the local faith community, they're just, what is happening, what's going on. And then of course, when you're in the academic setting, I remember once a group of us went to lunch, and I don't know, this happens, you get these wacky people on the news, they'll say something really stupid or whatever. And so the group, somehow the topic of speaking in tongues, and the group, as we're all walking to lunch, somebody comments about just how bizarre are these people, and what is going on, and snakes, and all kinds of kooky things, and I was just like, oh man, okay.
So how long did you let them go before you pulled the ripcord?
Yeah, just a couple minutes. And then the beauty of being in kind of a Berkeley environment is once you associate it with your own subject position, then they have to shut up, right? Nobody can critique. So I said, so about those speaking in tongues people, I do that sometimes. And they're like, oh, what? So it's strange. Of course, then, the whole conversation has to recalibrate.
There's a bit of a gear grinding as they try to move back to where they're supposed to be, huh?
Yeah. I did assure them that I don't play with snakes, though. I don't fool with that sort of thing.
That's good to know. Yeah. By the way, folks, we don't either. If you're new to the broadcast, we do not play with snakes. We believe that we're able to shake snakes away, but we're not looking for them to come to us at all.
Right. Plus, I've learned most of the problematic snakes anyways actually do have legs. So
that is true. That is true. And arms.
Yes.
All right. So the majority of your time doing your PhD at Berkeley GTU was also spent at the same time as pastor of your home church in Orville. Is that correct?
Yes. Uh-huh.
All right.
Yeah.
So you're done. Now you just settle in to be pastor, right?
Yeah, no. It's so I also, even at the beginning, I wasn't sure of the timeline, but from the very beginning of the pastoral project, it was very apparent to me in kind of the discernment that this was another project. It wasn't the final destination. So I was always kind of keeping an eye, and one of the things in the project that I was both very clear about in my own time of prayer, but also with people close to me, is I want to make sure that I'm attentive to the changing of the seasons, because especially in something like a position as a pastor, um, we cede a lot of authority there. And so if I wanted to, I could just turn it into a forever thing, right? Even if that's not what it's supposed to be. So
Mhm.
the challenge is trying to figure out, when's the moment. And so a few years before I finished, I started getting a sense that the kind of the pressure was changing. By now, having had several of these kind of shifts and pivots, start learning to recognize, again, the metaphor I think that's useful is kind of, the barometric pressure changing before a change in weather. And I guess people with gout or whatever can feel that sort of thing, but there are lots of signs that you kind of go outside and you're like, I think it might rain today. It's not because you looked it up on the internet. It's you've been through enough storms that you're like, something feels different in the air. So I started getting a sense of that, started bouncing that off of people like your dad and others. And then for me, though, the kind of the pivot has always come with when something new opens, right? That this just seems to be the pattern for me. As you're paying attention, something shifts, something changes. Are you ready to roll with it? And so that's what happened for me, as a shift opened up a position, even in kind of a non-hiring zone, at a university, to really focus on teaching in the Jewish studies, New Testament, Old Testament, science and religion program. And so it just seemed like it was the perfect timing. Everything fell into place, and so I rolled with it. So now I'm here in Los Angeles. So I teach Hebrew Bible, um, New Testament, science and religion, ancient Near Eastern religion, kind of a mix of things. So.
And since my friend Roy mentioned that I was in on the conversation of him taking the pastorate, I feel it my duty to also mention that he did close that out by having a conversation with me on the outside of the transition as well. I remember that conversation very well because it began at a dock in Australia as I was boarding a boat with my wife to go and spend during our missions work in and teaching in Australia. We had 3 or 4 days that we were going out to an island, Fitzroy Island, where we actually snorkeled over the barrier reef. And I was at the dock on the boat and headed out to Fitzroy Island. And so Roy's talking to me, and I'm like, okay, Roy, at some point I'm going to drop you. And so we chatted through, and then we connected when I came back to land. But I remember that clearly. That was part of the discernment period and process time. And so now you are no longer pastoring. So you are what I would say fully in the academy. And any idea what's next?
No, but I'm fine with that. It's okay. I don't need to know what's next. This is sufficient. So
All right. And
it's
that,
good. It's fun to just rest where you're supposed to be, and not. We can get in trouble, I think, sometimes always looking for the next thing. I think we have to be wise and understand that things don't last forever, but it's worth being mindful of being present to the task at hand.
yep.
And when it's time to do something different, I'm sure it will change.
And hence this story, I had a larger purpose in because Roy and I could have sat and talked about a lot of things. If you haven't already picked up on it, Roy is I like to hang around Roy because Roy makes me seem normal, which is doing something. So we could have talked about a lot of things, but I thought that this conversation, and there were pieces of it that I didn't even know, which I always find interesting, but this conversation would allow us to kind of look at this journey of faith, if you will, because it reminds me, not that I'm calling Roy Abraham. I'm not saying he's the father of the faithful, but this kind of story, this kind of path, this kind of pivot and shifts, I think Abraham may have felt, and it may have looked a lot like this. Fits and starts. At times completely in line with God, other times maybe not so much. And God had to kind of go reach out and get Abraham and fit his plans around Abraham. And thankfully, God's gracious to do that sometimes. He takes our mistakes or our detours and he fits it into his plan. But this journey of faith that I joke about being lost, but yet at the same time, I would argue that anyone walking in faith, well, faith is defined as things hoped for and things not seen. And that sounds like lost a lot of times. If I know exactly where I'm at and I know exactly where I'm going and I have a clear view of it, well, that's not faith. So it's not a journey of faith. So Vincent, do we have questions? I have a feeling that there's quite a few. So why don't you pop on? And
while he's coming on, let me just respond quickly to what you just said, because I think there's something worth highlighting there.
Okay.
With Abraham, we read the story in condensed form.
Yes, we do.
You kind of map it out, the gaps between, right? You read it in just a couple chapters, you think, oh, God's talking to him every week. No, there may be years in between these episodes. And then the last thing, I think often we fixate on the maps instead of the presents. So from one perspective, if you take your child for a walk, the child's lost insofar that they probably don't know where they're going, but they're not lost insofar as they're with you.
That's right.
And so I think often that's where we get into trouble, is we imagine that this thing rises and falls on our capacity to map out the trajectory, when really it's all about who we're with.
Yep, that's a great point. And that's exactly why I thought that Roy's story, in addition to being very humorous and interesting and weird and odd and all of those kinds of things, which makes for a great story. Tell me you don't read books that they take twists and turns. That's the point. But it also puts before us the challenge that I would argue that every Christian has, which is to walk with Jesus. You know, the disciples did not always know what was going on. In fact, the scriptures seem to portray that they rarely knew what was going on. And yet they were his disciples, and yet he trusted the gospel into their hands. All right, Vincent, why don't you take the banner down on question time and pop up some questions. And Roy, you'll be able to see them as well on your screen.
All right, so this first one is within context, but this one was popped up when you were discussing the conference that people actually showed up to, or the presentation, or that. Sister Leela asked, what was the topic being covered at that point?
Do you want to say, Roy, or do you want me to say?
Well, you can say, because there were actually a couple of, I think it's not a one-off event that people get a little wound up when I'm presenting. The episode I think you're referring to was the afterlife discussion. Was this the one? Okay.
It was. It was the one where we were presenting an alternate view with regard to how Revelation should be read. And interestingly, I largely agreed with Roy, but I was not doing anything in it except moderating the session. But by the time it was over, our esteemed colleague had decided that not only Roy, but also Stephen Beardsley were both about to destroy the United Pentecostal Church and our eschatology and our understanding of the end of the world, which unfortunately I hadn't really said anything except to moderate. Now, in all honesty, I largely agreed with Roy. I mean, Roy always says it a little bit more polished and also a little bit more extreme. I always say it a little less polished and usually just as extreme. And so anyway, the point is that I hadn't really said a whole lot, but that was the topic. It was.
Yeah. So my basic claim is, strangely enough, very similar to what I just said a couple of moments ago, that people misunderstand the book of Revelation because they read it and try to decipher it as if, when in fact, if you look at the way that the book is put together, it's an anti-map. Like the strange imagery, the looping back of chronologies, it's meant to destabilize any sense that you might have that you know how this is going. The end result being you have to trust the guide, namely Jesus. It's the revelation of Jesus Christ, right? So that's the ultimate goal of the thing, is to destabilize any coherent picture you have that you think you know how this story is going to go, which then forces you into the position of saying, I don't know the timeline, so I'm just going to have to stick with Jesus. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
And somehow that's radical. That's the part. So often, just to be clear, I don't think I'm being that radical. I just think I'm being rather biblical. But yeah.
Well, and folks,
and you're right. Steve did say a lot in the session. He just, yeah. I just saw something pop up who said, who believes Steve didn't say much during the session? Nobody believes that. Yeah.
It was just in my role as the moderator.
Okay.
I was not presenting a paper. I just
Yeah.
was doing my role as the moderator. Requires a lot of speech to keep Roy in the right lane here. You know, it's how it works. All right, Vincent, let's move us along.
All right. So the next one is from Mom. Lots of people have trouble with science and religion, quote, conflicting. How do you deal with that as you have studied both?
Yeah, so usually what I do, because I teach fairly regularly now a class on science and religion, is try to help people walk back what those concepts and terms mean. So usually what I find is people have adopted kind of popular conceptions of science and religion, and a lot of the conflict derives from a fundamental misunderstanding of what these things are doing. So ways of knowing, for example, often it gets paired as one is the only way to know something. And I remind my students, science is an important way of knowing the world, but poetry is also a way of knowing the world. Art is a way of knowing the world. Human relationships, there's a lot of modalities for knowing the world, and religion is a different a different domain. So then we also walk back and go kind of back to Paleolithic times and cave paintings and show that religion is much more than answering the God question. It's really crafting a coherent view of the world that involves symbolism, imagery. Yeah, so that's kind of a long answer, but the short version is we have to stop and really think about what the words mean. And then we can start thinking about how they might interact with one another. So.
All right. So then another one from Mom. Can you share a funny story about Dad?
Yeah, there's. Well, I mean, trying to think what would be a good story. I mean, I don't know, like an anecdote. Often when I would go to UGST, we would both stay with our other dear friend Jeff Brickle, and so Steve would post up like the king in the recliner and lay back in the chair, and we would just kind of go at it for hours.
It was my chair. The family had said it was my chair. I can't help it. You were there so infrequently. I was there more frequently. So
yeah, I have to think about kind of an anecdote. And I mean, I think some of our students used to argue about who was more pretentious, and he usually won on that account. But I don't know if that's necessarily a funny story or not. I know a funny story is his father once explained to me the challenges of teaching Steve to throw a baseball. And this is why evidently he taught the boys how to throw and bat and things, because it just wasn't in Steve's wheelhouse, so to speak. So he was very kind about it, huh?
I might note taught is a rather weak word. None of us can really throw or bat.
Throw. Yeah. Well, at least it was your grandfather that exposed you to the concept of throwing a ball. Maybe that's a better way to phrase. So, but I mean, that being said, I can't throw anything either. So, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So this one is similar to the previous question, but has a bit of a different tack. What practical
Maybe another
things do you do to
question.
keep
I'll
a
think of
balance between academia and spiritual discernment? So not just what's the difference, but what practical things do you do to keep the balance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think for me, there are a couple of practical things. One, I think you really have to be intentional about cultivating meaningful conversation partners outside of each of those domains and within those domains. So you really need people, and I hope that came up or was evident as I was describing kind of the journey, that along the way there are people that are involved in the conversation. And so that's one practical thing. Is that there are people in my life that are aware of both of these domains that I keep in conversation with. And then, I mean, I do things like I'm a big fan of doing journaling, stuff like that. So spending time to kind of reflect. I'm a big fan of kind of the whole process of self-reflection. But yeah. I mean, I would say those are two of the big ones. Is you have to develop your own spiritual practices that overlap some with kind of your own personal development. So spiritual practices, academic practices, and then some conversation partners. So I guess that would be kind of the short answer there. Practical enough, I hope.
All right. So then another question. In all of your adventures, what has been the most challenging to you?
Well, I think on some level, probably being able to recognize that, okay, this is the path that I'm being called to walk down. Even if no one else gets it, I've got to keep going. And so I think sometimes, especially when it comes to things like academic stuff or things that kind of fall outside the mainstream for any institution, but often people try to frame it in, are you leaving X? Are you abandoning Y? And I think for me, the challenge is always kind of reorienting and making sure that my focus is not on I'm leaving X. It's always, am I following Jesus? Right? That's kind of that, again, that Thomas Merton thing. And a lot of times, to be honest, people are just not going to understand that for a variety of reasons. Some well-intentioned, others not well-intentioned. But I think that's kind of the challenge, is being willing, or the most challenging thing for me is willing to just keep walking. Even if you don't even understand all of it, but more so, yeah, if people around you are threatened or fearful, you know, Stephen, your dad often would say to me when I would call him and say, you know, what's going on, 9 out of 10 times he would say, oh, that's fear at work. It's fear at work. And I think he was spot on, but it's nice to have somebody else come out and you know, help say that for you, especially somebody that punches at a much higher level than I ever did. So.
All right. So then another one. Where would you like to visit for either a few weeks or a long time? Either one.
Mars, actually, but probably in the near future, probably not going to be able to pull that one off. So
I don't know. I heard
really
I heard they made oxygen up there, didn't they?
Well, yeah, but I kind of consume a lot of oxygen. I'm not really going to be contributing to the oxygen flow.
Yes.
In the more immediate, I'd like to take a trip to Iceland. So go hang out, see the Northern Lights. I don't know if anybody's ever seen pictures of the Blue Lagoon. Yeah, so I think that would be a nice place to visit in the short term.
All right. So that's all the questions we have.
Looks like we lost Vincent.
Just for a moment.
Oh, you're back, Vince.
Yep. Yeah, sorry. It looks like my internet dropped out there for a moment. So let's see. Another question. This one's just a curiosity for me. So related to the science versus, not versus, but science and religion in pairing discussion. Can you think of an example that people often would view them as conflicting with each other, but in reality they complement each other or can interact well?
Yeah. So, so one in which people often think that they're conflicting are in terms of epistemology, knowing the world. And I think that if you step back and realize that human beings on an everyday basis encounter and come to know the world in a multiplicity of modalities, not just through the scientific method. Scientific method is really powerful within a very narrow prescribed domain, but there are all kinds of other ways that we know the world. So once you accept that reality, then you can think about in what ways then do the spiritual life and religion contribute to a more holistic encounter with the world. So I think really what it means to be a human is to be present. And humans seem to be rather unique among animals, as far as we know, in our capacity for symbolic thought. So people are always asking, when are we going to time travel? We do it all the time, right? We just time traveled in this conversation back into the past, and we're thinking about the future. That's a really powerful conceptual ability that most people or most other animals, as far as we know, don't have. Your dog can be acclimated to a certain noise that means food, but they don't have episodic memory, as far as we can tell. So I would say that's one example for me, is once I help students realize, wait a minute, we're encountering the world in a whole host of modalities, decisions. If you say something like, should I take a job in such and such city? You can't really run an experiment on it. You have some data, you have some empirical data, but then you have values, you have dreams, you have aspirations. None of these things are subjective to kind of an empiricist. They're rational, but they're not empirical. Or do I marry this person? You'll get into a lot of trouble if you start doing experiments on potential spouses in the hopes of figuring out if they'd make a good partner. This is not how you do it. You have data, but ultimately, and this is the normal mode of being a human. So part of the time is people think being religious or having a spiritual perspective or praying, this is somehow a weird outlier for the human. Like that's a weird thing to do, when in reality, that's how we encounter the world all of the time. It's just being intentional about it. Does that actually answer the question you asked?
I believe so.
And I would add that our biggest problem is instead of it being an either or, I'm either religious or I'm scientific, it's a both and.
Yeah, exactly. No, and you are, and in some sense, you can't get out of it.
Absolutely.
Like
I was going to say,
hardwired.
those who say they're not scientific, they're lying. They just won't call it scientific, but they are observing, they are gathering data, they are doing the things that we call science. They just don't call it that. Or those who say, I'm not religious. Well, yes, you are, actually. You believe in things that are not data. You believe in things that are not sensory. Yes, you are. You are religious. It's just these both and.
If you cash a paycheck, you're religious.
Absolutely.
Right?
You're believing in
money is the biggest fictive game that we all play every day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, Vince, I know there's lots more questions. Let's move on and see if we can pack in a couple more.
All right. So the next one is, what book besides the Bible would you love to see everyone read?
Oh, that's a good question, because I read lots and lots of books. Oh my.
Yes, a phone conversation with Roy is very frustrating, my dear friends, because I don't read as much as you all think I do. And Roy reads much more than I read. And so he'll go, I'm reading a book. I don't know if you've seen it yet. And it's like very embarrassing, because every single time I either just sit there and go, tell me about it, Roy, or I say, no, I haven't read that book. And then there will be a follow-up text with a link to the book, as if I'm supposed to go buy it and read it. Luckily, he doesn't do pop quizzes, so I'm glad for that. Anyway, go ahead, Roy.
Well, let's pick it. Let's pick an ancient book, the Epic of Gilgamesh. How about that one?
Oh,
Because it's actually older than the Bible, but it gives you an opportunity to kind of see what people were grappling with before the Bible gets written. So questions of immortality and fame and responsibility, and so sometimes people think the Bible invented the questions. The humans they had the questions. So the Epic of Gilgamesh is maybe it's a good start. Definitely, you should read that before you read, Homer and the Odyssey and the Iliad. I mean, Gilgamesh is 1,000 years older than that, at least. So
now the sad thing for all of our audience is every one of my children has read the Epic of Gilgamesh. That tells you what a geek your pastor and his wife are, because they have all read the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's staple material for our homeschooling. But anyway, so that makes Roy happy, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many books. It's hard. So I'll just pick that one because it's like the oldest book that I would recommend. So it's the oldest epic.
All right. So then the next one, with all your studies, both biblical and scientific, and all your life experiences, when you look at the current state of our country with race and COVID and everything going on, and the church's response, what do you wish the church could understand?
Yeah. So this is a good question. One that Steve and I have talked about a lot. I really think the contemporary church has lost a beautiful opportunity to demonstrate the service and the giving nature of the gospel. Whenever I hear a Christian start talking about their rights, I have to interrupt them, because there is nothing in the gospel about my rights. What's in the gospel is take up your cross and follow me. Except you lose your life, you're not going to save it. The first will be last. And so I think there's a powerful opportunity. And again, I'm not talking politics. I mean, there's the rule of law and a whole bunch of other side conversations. But fundamentally, I think we are in a wonderful place to demonstrate the great grace that has been bestowed upon us. And if we start the conversation with, here are my rights. So I'll just, since Steve knows this is the kind of stuff I say, I'll say it. So Christians who, well, it's my right not to wear a mask. You've missed the whole point. I don't wear a mask to protect me. I wear it as a sign of respect for you. And if there's the slightest chance that it can benefit you, I think it's something worth considering. And so there are lots of these conversations in the contemporary world about everything from health to everything, again, since I'm already, stepping in it, things, refusing to bake cakes for people because we disagree with them. I think the Christian response is, let me find the person who I disagree with the most and bring grace into their life. The person who hates me the most, how do I bless them? So this is, I think, the mode that the church really needs to step up. This is how our master, if you'll say, that's the model that he laid down. It's not about, what can I get? It's really stepping into places and helping people who, again, may dislike us, with whom we have very different values. I know I got into a lot of trouble for cooperating with a local mosque in my area to bring food to people. And so, there was, well, are you compromising, blah, 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 in Islam? And like, we are humans. And if you cannot share food with people that you disagree with, maybe you're not reading the same book that I am. So that's kind of so I haven't left all the preachiness. I haven't discarded all of that. There's still a little bit of, preacher in here somewhere, I guess, right? We have been given great grace. And I think our task is to focus less on our rights and less on our demands and more on how do we bring that into the lives of people that disagree with us, and for whom we have different values. I mean, if you bless someone that disagrees with you, and this means somehow you didn't have a way to start.
Say that last statement. You broke up a little bit, Roy. Say that last one. If you bless someone who disagrees with you.
No, I said, so if you can't bless and bring grace into the life of someone. Oh, no, I know what statement you're talking about. Yeah, so I said, if by extending the grace that has been given to you, by extending that to the life of someone that has different values than you, that has a different politics than you, that has different whatever from you, if somehow that means you've lost your way, you were never on the way to start with, because this is the way of Jesus.
That's right.
Yeah. So the people who are paranoid about losing their way, I've found, are often not actually on the way. That's the source of the paranoia, right? They're afraid of losing something they don't actually have.
So you think I'm okay that I allow the Muslims to park on our parking lot as they attend mosque down the street? You think I'm okay?
Yeah, and I hope you don't charge them.
Oh, I don't charge them. They've never paid a penny.
I know, but that's
Yeah.
I had to throw it out there. No, I think it's great. I think it's a way to look out and find ways. Yeah, most of the times when people say, "Oh, I can't stand Christians because they do X, Y, Z," they really have done X, Y, Z, right? Like, people aren't making up the stuff. Now, it's not to say that all Christians do it. It's not an excuse, but I think we do have a beautiful opportunity.
Absolutely.
We have been given great grace, not stingy, not minuscule, but great grace. And I think that's our call in this hour, is to let that flow out.
And I would add to it, as kind of a crowning point to it, is that where sin doth abound, please understand, sin doesn't overcome grace. Grace doth much more abound. Grace overcomes sin. Darkness doesn't overcome light. Light overcomes darkness. And that's why Jesus got into so much trouble, but he understood something that the Pharisees and others didn't understand, which is, when I touch the leper, healing's going to come from me to the leper, not the leper going to pollute me. And there's a metaphor there, but of course it applies to so many more things. It's the power of the gospel. It's the power of Jesus Christ within our lives. Well, Roy, there are probably more questions and there are more things, but unfortunately, I've already run over 7 minutes with the broadcast. And so I'm going to draw us to a close. Everyone, thank you for joining us tonight. You can understand why I invited my friend Roy, and he is my friend. I appreciate him. I enjoy my dialogues with him, even when he leaves me in the dust. And that takes a little bit of doing, because I'm a pretty sharp cookie, but Roy at times leaves me in the dust. I go, Roy, I don't even care about what you're talking about, but we have great conversations. And it is an honor to be one of his conversation partners. So, Roy, thank you for spending time with us tonight. And to all the rest of you, thank you for being with us. Again, remember, we broadcast every single night except for Monday night. Monday night is our Sabbath. We take the day off there, staff and everyone. So we have 1 day a week, but Tuesday through Sunday, 7 o'clock. So we'll be back here tomorrow night at 7 p.m. And we're in the midst of looking at some of the parables. And so we're going to have a great time looking at that. And so to all of you, thank you for being with us. Thank you, Roy, for being with us as well. And I say to all of you, God bless. Have a great night. Good night, everyone.